We're very pleased to have a couple of friends who are also locals from Mobile area who have both published. In fact, we have a table over here, a book table. After the lecture, you're welcome to go to the book table and check out some of their publications. They've published and won awards for the publication, and they're in the area of fiction, and so this lecture is the literature of belief. As you can see up here, there's a quote from the Gospel of John: "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us." In our Christus series this year, we have been exploring faith through different lenses. Dr. Matthew Ball, did a lecture on looking at faith through the lens of philosophy, especially Kierkegaard. We have also looked at faith now through the lens of literature in this particular lecture. Next lecture coming up, Father Ollie Williams from Notre Dame University will talk about the spirituality of business. So faith through the lens of business, different lenses. This tonight will be quite interesting because literature, it's about the Word made flesh, but it's also elastic. It can be played with in different ways, and so the fiction of reality. But this evening we're going to hear from two practicing published authors, Dr. Ron Gorman, who grew up in my home state of Texas. Every once in a while shows up at the Spanish Mass there at St. Catherine's because they're in Houston. As he said in his bio, he developed a devotion to Our Lady of Guadalupe and also to the Spanish language. And then Kaye Park Hinckley, who has family in Mobile but now lives in Dothan, two Alabama authors. So please welcome Ron and Kaye. And as you can see, we are filming this. Hopefully it will go without a glitch. And so at some point when the offices get everything together, we'll be able to post this on our website and our Facebook page. So Ron and Kaye, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It really is. This is my alma mater, by the way. The literature of belief. What are we talking about? The power of any author's words come out of his belief, his convictions, his or her deeply felt creed. The cornerstone of Christian belief is the Incarnation. So more than anything else, a writer with a Christian perspective is writing stories based on his or her belief in the Incarnation. In fact, God meant for the Incarnation to be the overreaching story that will lead us to Him. It is the story of His offer of eternity, time without end. It is the story of His seeking us, human beings who will laugh and cry and suffer and be finally joyful. And it is the story of His desire that we in turn seek Him. The evangelizing power of literature is sanctified by Jesus Christ through His parables, through fiction. The prodigal son was a figment of God's imagination, a work of art, a story told by Jesus to illuminate certain truths: love over hate, forgiveness over retribution, gratitude and humility over ingratitude and self-importance. The prodigal son, as a character in the story, embodies much more than just a self-centered person who did wrong. He is an example of humanity. He was self-centered and he chose wrong things, yet God continued to love him. One theme in the story is that continuing love. It is the theme of the books we write, and it is the theme of the Christian life as well. The underpinning of the literature of belief that Ron and I refer to as Catholic fiction is that every human being, like the characters in a novel, wants something for himself. And every one of us, like the characters in a novel, seeks something that we perceive as good, something that will satisfy us, that will satisfy our yearnings. But the good that we are yearning for may not actually be of true good for us. The true source of the soul's satisfaction is God. God alone completes us. G.K. Chesterton said, though, every man who knocks on the door of a brothel is looking for God. And we all have our personal brothels, don't we? In Catholic fiction, so do the characters. The brothels have different names, like pleasure, power, money, sex, addictions, and plain meanness. But each is an attempt to satisfy the ache in our soul. Of course, just as an anesthetic does, these only dull the pain. So when a character goes about gobbling up those apparent goods that he thinks he must have, he is truly seeking something of much more value. He is seeking God. The fundamental story question in Christian fiction is, will the character find him or not? The same question we might ask ourselves. As you know, the mission of Christus is to encourage a reflective deepening and broadening of the search for God in our Christian tradition. As fiction writers, Ron and I have a similar mission, to create stories that show a character's sometimes desperate search to satisfy the ache in his soul. So think of the video I'm about to show you as the overarching story of the Incarnation before and after. After our all-powerful and loving God offered the world his only Son, so that we might seek him, get to know him and love him, and look to him for answers. I ask that you also think of the video as coming from two seeking perspectives. The first perspective is from an author of Christian fiction, and the second is from your own as a Christian reader. Writer-reader is an intimately private relationship, somewhat like a covenant, with the promise of something to be revealed through the give and take action of seeking. And remember, both in story and real life, when a person or a character seeks, there is always the possibility of finding.
I am the might before the sword, the tremors in the spear shaft. I craft my ways through blazes of firestorms, absorb the failings of deadened ends to render the floors I dance upon. I am the spaces between applause, the roars of hearts running through heaven's halls. I breathe the forms of light and silence, stall the course of cosmic riots. I am the glory of the giants Manasseh, Sagamatha, watchmen of the Asian plains. They yield my name, made famous through the cries of albatross flocks, inflamed in Pacific fires. I am dressed in the spray of Nevada dunes, clothed in the shadows of Sahara caves. I am the light of lunar flames, fleshing the rains of Amazonia. I paint the trains of Antarctic quests, release dominion to desert Panthera. I authorize the remains of Aztec and Inca that bloom through the visions of mountain tribes. I ride the skylines, breathe the signs, ignite the paths of astronomy's eyes. I am the unheard, heard in the storms that burn on my words. I am the yearned for. I am the word. I emerge deciduous from the wetlands of your cries. Rise from the moments you wake. I bring the dawns that shake the fevers from your remembrance. I am here. I am imminent. I am he who crosses the plains through which you strayed. Discover the parts extinction seared. I dust away the dried remains of tears. Drain the lakes of your regrets. I wet the wells, till the soil, forsake the toil, quell the rages, sow the broken pages with my belief in you. I bring the you have never quite met. I am the desire that keeps your pillow wet. I am the heartbeat you seek when you chase after dreams. In the reachings and sighs you are looking for me. In the body touching body, it is me you seek. In the groans and the longings, it is me you seek. In the yearning dream, in the need to be seen. In the love me, it is me you seek. In the breath drop wonders, gasping hunger, in the touch of a stranger that makes you feel younger, in the books and the fables, in the this is me labels, in the is this me, in the hear me, say my name, in the touch me, find me, need me, find me, in the aching pain, in the love, the music, the beats, the taste, and the heat, and the need for embrace, in the colour, the gaze, the meaning, the desire, in the flame of the voice, and the spirit of the fire. When you cry for more, my name you weep. I am he who waits for you to reach. I reach for you and wait. When you lie half broken and awake, I am the watchman of your sleep. I wait and wait till the shakings cease. I am the truth they call release. When the darkness flares and starts to speak, I sculpt the shades of daybreak. It is me you seek.
I think that's a beautiful video, don't y'all? So in the literature of belief, we're talking about God's belief in us and our belief in God. We're talking about the omnipotent power of a God who is always with us and always will be with us and present in the world. The omnipotent power of a God expressed in each and every life that was created by Him. We're talking about finding God's presence, not just in the tabernacle, but in the people around us and within ourselves, and in the characters we may write about. Finally, we're talking about how Catholic fiction can help both author and reader understand ourselves and our place on earth.
In a very real way, one can say that the Incarnation not only brought salvation to mankind, but gave birth to the novel. Percy writes, Judeo-Christianity is about pilgrims who have something wrong with them and are embarked on a search to find a way out. And that is also what novels are about. He points out that the novel is a creature of the Christian world, a creature of the Christian West, and is virtually non-existent in the Buddhist, Taoist, Brahmin East, or in Marxist countries. I would agree, because our Western view emphasizes the individual, and the novel format serves to tell the story of a wayfarer with a beginning, a middle, and an end. The novel may have found its origin and its form in the Incarnation, and for centuries, novels were infused with a Catholic worldview. But Percy points out that in the 20th century, there are two impediments that rose that confront the author, the Catholic author, who wants to write from a Catholic worldview. The first is, unfortunately, the devaluation of the Christian vocabulary. Words like God, sin, grace, mercy, redemption have become shop-worn, and they've lost much of their meaning. As Percy states, the very word Christian is not good news to most readers. Imagine yourself when you're in the bookstore and you're looking for a book, and the category says Christian romance, Christian mystery, Christian suspense, and what your reaction is. The second obstacle is that the Catholic author faces is that the reader has a sense of hypocrisy frequently about Christian authors. Percy spoke of the stain of racism in the South. He was one of our great Southern authors. Today, we not only carry the weight of that legacy, but we also have a time when we have many very public failings of our church that have been displayed in our news, and certain readers have a sense of hypocrisy when they read somebody trying to write from that Catholic worldview. What's an author to do if you want to be a Catholic author and write from a Catholic worldview? Pope St. John Paul II, in his letter to the artist, said, "If one discerns an artistic vocation, one has an obligation to embrace it and share it." So for those of us who feel that we have a vocation to create art, whether in its many forms, we have an obligation to learn our craft, to hone it, to be better, and to try to create fiction that reflects that Catholic worldview. As my personal case, I've been drawn to write crime fiction. And at first thought, that may seem to be somewhat incongruous with the idea of Christian fiction. But I've been inspired by the authors like James Lee Burke, the dean of modern American crime fiction. Here we see Burke to the right of his protagonist creation, Dave Robichaux, as portrayed in films by Tommy Lee Jones. You know, obviously we'll see the resemblance there. And when you read his works, you see the resemblance between Burke and Robichaux. Like Burke, Robichaux hails from New Iberia, Louisiana. He's a recovering alcoholic and has rediscovered his Catholic faith. The thing I like about Burke, perhaps the best, beyond his wonderful literary talents and his plotting and his character developments, but is his total willingness to infuse his work with his Catholic identity. In his novel Sunset Limited, Robichaux is looking at a photo of a murder victim, and Burke describes it this way. His head lay on his shoulder, his eyes were rolled into his head, and his impaled arms stretched out on the wood of the barn wall. The theme of redemption runs through all 20 of the Dave Robichaux novels. And Burke's books remind me those of Flannery O'Connor, who likewise elegantly described our flawed nature. And Kaye's novel, her debut novel, evokes some of O'Connor's Southern literary style. In her book, A Hunger in the Heart, she chronicles broken individuals and their search for healing. One of the characters speaks about faith. She says, "All you have to do is reach out for her. Love will reach back. Love always reaches back." And isn't that the story of creation? Story of the Incarnation. God's love in the Incarnation reaching back for us. As Catholic authors inspired by the likes of Percy, O'Connor, Burke, and others, we have to weave that mystery of the Incarnation into our stories. But we remember our audience, and perhaps their doubting of our motives. And so we have to weave the Incarnation in a believable manner and with humility. Not preachy, but natural as God's love.
Some say that a religious perspective shapes one's creativity to such an extent that it corrupts art for its purposes. But does a non-religious perspective act in the same way? Does a non-religious perspective also corrupt art for its purposes? The fact is, a myriad of perspectives exist in our world. How do we see the world around us? How do we choose to live in it? A writer's belief, whether religious, political, or social, will affect his or her creation. It is a matter of degree whether the creation becomes art or whether it is turned into propaganda. Religion does not compromise art, and it is not an impediment to the fiction writer. On the contrary, it aids in creativity, providing a component that pushes life and human reason to a higher, non-material level, instead of a simple day-to-day dogmatism. It is a lens through which an author translates a very human world without moralizing propaganda, but rather with an empathy for all that makes us human, both spiritual, the invisible, and physical, the visible. Some authors write a story that is slavishly and artificially constructed to argue his point. The story is not nearly as important as the moral of the story. This may at first sound logical, but in my opinion, it is not the right approach to writing fiction. Here is Flannery O'Connor's Catholic orientation. From the sign to the thing signified, from the visible to the invisible, from the sacrament to the mystery. The more real fiction is, the more the story confronts the reader with concrete details in language rather than abstract ideas. The greater and the more forceful the metaphysical persuasiveness and power become. Readers of O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find, for example, do not have to be subjected to a Catholic lecture on human sinfulness. Rather, the misfit in that story is so concretely and vividly and authentically presented to our senses that we know him intimately, and we know the wickedness in his heart, and that part of his life is a reality that cannot be denied. Flannery O'Connor, as a Catholic Southern writer, understood that fiction is not firstly and ultimately about an idea, but about incarnation, about personification, about making our characters real, concrete. It is about matter. It is about life. A common experience in humanity is one of depravity. The Christian author's lens is the grace of God offered to humanity in spite of his depravity. But the reader shouldn't have to be a believer to appreciate the story. Because even though we are writing fiction, as authors, we must present real problems that real people face in a real world, and in which fewer and fewer people believe in belief. Or else they come up with their own personal set of beliefs, ignoring absolute truth, for a sort of milquetoast truth that isn't too tough for them to stomach. So there are hurdles for writers coming from a perspective of belief. 50 years ago, Flannery O'Connor made reference to one of the hurdles a Christian writer has to face, and that is to make belief believable. How does a writer do that? First, all the rules of good fiction must be employed by the writer, so that he or she can effectively reveal how even small instances of belief can grab a person and change his individual life. The novelist will study men and women. He will be concerned with their actions and their thoughts, their errors and their follies, their greatness and their meanness, the countless varying moods to be seen among them, the forces which act upon them, the passions, prejudices, hopes, which pull them this way and that. He will show what his characters believe and how they come to believe it. But he will not do this with slavishly religious situations or language. He will not do this with platitudes. He will attempt to speak to the soul of the reader, which is a much, much more difficult task. He may do this through specific imagery or entire story themes, but he must always satisfy the fundamental human desire: who, what, where, when, and why. Without getting this right, no story will hold the reader's interest for very long. The prolific best-selling author Dean Koontz, who is a convert to Catholicism, has spoken about the Catholic perspective in his own writing. He says, "It gives me a sense that the world has shape and form and function and meaning. I suppose that's my favorite thing about being a Catholic, because I don't wander aimlessly, seeking for some meaning in things. I have a sense of what those meanings are. It opened my eyes to a deeper, more complex world, and that leaves you a lifetime of exploring to follow." Well, yes, our world is indeed complex and confusing. Who's lying and who's not? But because of our belief in the Incarnation, a writer of Catholic fiction makes it clear, without browbeating the reader, that no matter the confusion, God is present in the here and now. As for myself as an author, my vantage point comes out of my Catholic faith as well, but also my Southern roots. I know who I am as a writer, and I don't try to be different from that. I've never lived or wanted to live anywhere but the South, and I've never wanted to be anything but a Catholic. Despite that, all the men in my family, my father, my grandfather, and 4 uncles were Protestant and Southern. Nearly all of these men married Southern women who were Catholics. Then they themselves converted to Catholicism near the end of their lives. So I believe I understand, and I know I try to address all readers, whatever their faith or the lack of it. A great thing about being a Southern Catholic writer is that here most all native Southerners, the greatest percent Protestant, know the Bible, can quote the Bible, and try to live by the Bible. And they admit they are sinners in need of being saved. I don't think you find that anywhere else to such a degree. So for writers like me, who are concerned with sin and salvation, a Southern setting is ripe for fiction. Add to that the fact that my grandmother's Macon, Georgia family of 9 children produced 3 nuns and 3 Jesuit priests, and that one of those cousin priests, Father Arnold Benedetto, studied theology, taught theology to my husband and I when we were students here at Spring Hill. Not only that, Father Arnold wrote the textbook that we studied. So you can see why my writing is influenced by Catholicism. Father Arnold, as well as his brother, Father Frank Benedetto, who taught at Loyola, New Orleans, are buried in this cemetery here. But at Spring Hill, there was another wonderful Jesuit who was not related to me. Father Robert McCowan taught me creative writing, pushed me into writing my first one-act play, and then helped me to produce it here on this campus. And this is especially interesting. Father Robert McCowan was the younger brother of yet another Jesuit, Father James Hootie McCowan, who served as spiritual advisor to one of the premier writers of Catholic fiction, Flannery O'Connor. So my Catholic imagination was bolstered by every Jesuit who taught me that God is truly present in everything we undertake in our lives. As an art major here at Spring Hill, studying under another Jesuit priest, Father Daniel Cragen, the first chair of Spring Hill's Fine Arts Department, I learned about the shadowing color of gray, not only as it appears in art, but as it appears in life. So this is the way I see it, and try to portray it as a writer of fiction, who is both Southern and Catholic. In my characters and in life itself, there are always 2 extreme actions, good and evil. To ignore them in fiction is to ignore truth. Think of 2 ends of a horizontal line. At one end is the bright white of absolute good. At the other end is the darkness of absolute evil. In between those ends are lighter and darker hues of the color gray. The farther we travel from either end, it becomes more difficult to see or to find our way back to the other. The fact is that most human beings travel along a line like this. They travel toward one end or the other, to the light or to the darkness. But in between the 2 ends, there is a lot of area in which to turn in an opposite direction, either a fall or an epiphany. This is core in Catholic fiction. The possibility of spiritual epiphany is always present in the work, though it may not always be accomplished by a character. Now let me say that I'm not an intellectual. I'm a writer who thinks of herself as a heart intellectual, much like Ron does every day, for real, as a cardiac surgeon. I attempt to perform surgery on my characters' hearts. No matter how evil or diseased their actions might be, I look for the goodness inside them, and usually I will find it, just when it seems as if there's no goodness inside them at all. And I think I ought to be done with that character. I take a deeper look and see them in my literary world as children of God, and suddenly there's another beginning. Sorry, y'all.
Louis L'Amour is the unchallenged king of Western fiction. And although he's been widely criticized as being formulaic, he sold over 200 million copies of his novels. He knows how to write a compelling plot. And so I love how he describes here the climax of the novel, that critical point where all seems lost. He says there will come a time when you believe everything is finished, and then that will be the beginning. Analogous to the dark moment of the soul is the novel's crisis, the final place, that final plot point where the protagonist has lost everything and now must choose his response, ideally framed as choices between right and wrong, between good and evil. St. John of the Cross, Dark Night of the Soul, describes the soul's journey to union with God. But before that journey is complete, we pass through that dark place where all seems lost. Merton says that the moment is marked by the temptation to doubt God himself. My novel, Fatal Rhythm, is based on my training experience with Dr. Mike DeBakey. This photo was taken at the end of my DeBakey rotation. 60 straight days, continuous on call, not even a break for any uninterrupted sleep. I hope that my fictional character, my protagonist in my novel, that I can convey this sense that one feels at this point in time, a sense of total exhaustion, fear of one's future, self-doubt, doubting all your decisions, and total despair. Because for the resident, it's a real dark night of the soul. This moment of crisis in the novel's world corresponds to a moment of spiritual crisis. And in our novels, we hope that we can relay that, and our protagonist must choose. Because for both the novel and our Catholic worldview, we depend on the existence of free will.
A writer creates something from nothing with words. Hopefully he creates a believable character, and then the writer presents a grace, a good, and gives the character the free will to choose it or not. Here's what best-selling author Dean Koontz has derived from his Catholic imagination. When you give them, your characters, free will, they will amaze you. It's during those moments when they take over the story that you really feel in communion with something higher than yourself. That you're exercising the creativity, which I sometimes think is a thing that really means we're created in God's image. We're created as He is, though not on such a grand scale. But at that moment, when you're exercising your creativity, it often feels like a sacred moment. Of course, we are created in God's image. It's where our goodness comes from. So a writer with a Catholic imagination will have a strong emotion about current events where goodness is not. The murder of children, debilitating disease, sadistic sexual perversion, dishonesty, meanness, and so on. Just check I choose not to follow on each of the 10 Commandments. The question then becomes, Can the mercy and grace of God, our Creator, be found where goodness is not? Flannery O'Connor once said that often the nature of grace can be made plain only by describing its absence. In other words, describing an opposite of grace, something she did so well in her novels and short stories. Go back to The Misfit. So the Catholic imagination will portray in large or small instances, in characters or in symbolic descriptions, the lack of goodness, yet the deep-seated yearning for it, and then seek some concrete way to show that God is powerful enough to draw out goodness from the atrocities that often emanate because of the misuse of free will. In the literature of belief, the Catholic writer's imagination links the divinity of God, the supernatural world, with the natural world. The task of writing becomes that of interlocking the two. Representations are created and specific truths about God's presence in our world appear in the writer's mind. She translates those truths in her settings and her characters and their dilemmas. And what she translates is the tenet called grace, both sanctifying grace and actual grace. Sanctifying grace, inherited from our God who made us, lives in the soul and stays in the soul. It's what gives us our dignity as human beings. By contrast, actual grace doesn't live in the soul. Rather, through a lifetime, it acts in the soul as divine pushes from God toward His goodness. Often when a character, or a person for that matter, is far from the bright white light we talked about. But those pushes must be noticed and must require cooperation. A Catholic imagination will translate that in fiction. A writer doesn't do this consciously, but not entirely, because his or her whole personality takes charge in the creation of the story. But a writer cannot write well about what he does not believe. The Catholic fiction writer understands that a person must accept grace by his own free will, and that grace, like love, is sometimes prickly. One of my characters says in my novel, A Hunger in the Heart, love isn't a symbol, it's an irritant, and it will cost you some skin. Real life love is painful. To give up some skin for it requires grace. The literature of belief we're talking about tonight translates grace even in a world or a character on the edge of evil. The author sees a double beginning and ending in everything, and I mean everything, including the awful current events I mentioned before. Along with this, he or she realizes that knowing reasons why is a human characteristic and part of making the story believable. She perceives a cause and an effect that creates another cause and effect, and on until an epiphany or a fall is created. Stories are discovered in his or her imagination and brought to light by a very intimate flashlight, one that shines a light on the many causes and effects of free will, and on the causes and effects of grace, both working and often conflicting in the same human soul. The stories in my collection, Birds of a Feather, are about the commonality each of us share as human beings, sin and its risk, and the presence of God's mercy, waiting for us to realize it's there, and then act with it. Sin and its risks are common in the literature of belief. In fact, sin and its risks are the undercurrents, the motors, the keys that start off the action in the story. What happens when a character takes them on is what makes the story distinctive. Sin and its risk define the story and give it its unique identity. That unique identity is important, and what keeps the literature of belief from being a sentimental, fuzzy book about being Christian. Here's what Flannery O'Connor said about identity in her writing from Mystery and Manners. An identity is not to be found on the surface. It is not accessible to the poll taker. It is not something that can become a cliche. It is not made from the mean average or from the typical, but from the hidden and often the most extreme. It is not made from what passes, but from those qualities that endure, regardless of what passes, because they are related to the truth. It lies very deep. In its entirety, it is known only to God, but of those who look for it, none gets so close as the artist. So as a Southern Catholic writer, the identity in my stories is wrapped in the wonderfully changeable material world around me, the world I live in. But as a Catholic writer, my identity is also wrapped in the mystery of mercy and grace in the immaterial world that lies deeply behind this one, because that is the world that is unchangeable and enduring.
We might say that grace is receiving what you don't deserve, and mercy not receiving what you do deserve. Given that definition, or those definitions, I appreciate the words of the Pulitzer Prize winning author Elizabeth Strout as she describes the author's relationship with her characters. And I can't help but think of it as a corollary to God's relationship with His creation. She says, I make these people up, so I don't have to condemn them. I can watch them behave badly and love them. John tells us, not we who loved God, but God loved us and sent His Son to expiate our sins. He loved us with all our failings. And even if we lose faith in that dark moment, as Merton says, even if we choose to deny the very existence of God, He remains faithful, for He cannot deny Himself. In this year of mercy, Pope Francis challenges us to perform acts of mercy. But before we can do that, we must first be open to receive God's mercy for ourselves. I hope as you read your next novel, look for that dark moment of the soul and look for God's mercy. Examine the character's exercise of free will, and I hope that you'll see their choices within our Catholic worldview of things being good and bad, right and wrong. Hopefully you'll find your work, your novel, your book, instilled with a Catholic worldview. Thank y'all.
Thank you very much. We'll have time for some questions and comments. I just want to make a couple of announcements before we get into that. On the registration table over here at this side, you'll see there's some flyers. There's enough that you can take any with you if you'd like. We're trying to spread the word. The president of Columbia Theological Seminary, Dr. Leanne Van Dyke, is the 10th president of Columbia, which is in Decatur, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. And she is being hosted for the 2016 Festival of Faith at Spring Hill Presbyterian Church for the first weekend of March. So Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, March the 4th, 5th, and 6th in the evening, and Sunday throughout the day. But all of the details are there on that flyer. Deep roots, wide service. And there's also a flyer for our summer Institute of Christian Spirituality, which will focus on the rejoicing in the God of mercy. Summer courses in June in Mobile and Atlanta. So as we open up the questions and comments for our lecture tonight, I'd like to start with one quick question. The film that we saw in the beginning and the end, where does that come from?
That is from Dan's Beavers. He is a Protestant, does beautiful, beautiful artistic films. And I had gotten the license to do Transport in St. Louis to both of those films. So I can use them. So, but he does beautiful evangelical work, really. And a lot of it is very applicable.
Well, thank you. And then one question just to start off, and then we'll open it up here to everyone else. All through this, you both have talked about writing out of faith and incarnation and so forth. But I'll ask this to both of you. Actually, you mentioned the whole idea of the Catholic fiction, and and the little film here, that, as you said, is fits right in with that, but it's not specifically Catholic. But when you use the term Catholic fiction, what characteristics do you identify as Catholic fiction, and how do you see that as important for fiction today?
I think the most important element about Catholic fiction is that... Oh, okay. Thank you, Mom. I'm still back to school. I think one of the most important things about Catholic fiction is that it is the sacraments. It's sacramental. I think that's a key characteristic in Catholic fiction, that we're bound by the sacraments and we believe that they're instruments of grace. And so I think the instruments of grace in Catholic fiction is what it all revolves around. At least that's the way I see it. I mean, when you're doing a character, you're not sitting there thinking, well, let's see, we'll put him in grace today and, God will turn his back on him tomorrow. It's a deeper process than that, but all that comes out. I mean, you write from your deep beliefs, and your Catholicism comes out, and it comes out mostly in the sacraments, to me.
I would just add, for me, the description would be, I think it's important that the literature have a Catholic worldview, Catholic with little c, that, for literally centuries, all literature existed written from that viewpoint, because everybody of the Western world basically agreed on things being right and wrong, that there was truth, and that there was a reality that transcended our existence. And now, unfortunately, we have, I think, a lot of folks who believe that every decision is relative and that there are no absolute rights or wrongs. And so I think for me, the Catholic novel is one where we have a Catholic worldview, that we feel that there is truth and beauty, and that our characters may be flawed, they may do terrible things, they may be murderers. We know from the Old Testament some of God's closest people, committed horrible acts. But there is still God's love. And so I would think a novel that engenders that belief system. Hey, Phil.
You talk about all writing, all art, had that Christian worldview. Could you speak to, all art throughout history, most of art, literature, I guess, definitely paintings, sculptures. The biggest patron of the arts throughout history has been the church. And could you speak to maybe how the church has gotten out of being the biggest patron of the arts and how that's contributed to the loss of this Catholic, this Christian worldview, and how can we get back to it? Have you thought, has that even crossed your mind?
Well, I think it's obvious when you're talking about Catholicism that it's not the peppermint of the day. I mean, evangelical people have made more of an advance, I think, than the Catholics have of late. And so that's going to be translated by authors who want to sell a book. Some of these authors that we talked about today are not Catholic, yet that Catholic worldview still, what we're talking about, the love of God and grace and all are in that. They may not even know it. I mean, they may not pointedly write like that for that reason. But because we're human and because we're made in the image and likeness of God, it's within us, every one of us, Catholic or not, Protestant, Jewish, whatever. It's in us. We're made in God's image. It's going to come out. So, but it's been put down lately because nobody wants to do the hard stuff. No, everybody wants sort of, as I mentioned before, a milquetoast kind of religion. And they want to pick and choose. You've heard the cafeteria thing. They want to pick and choose. It's not like that. God is calling us for something. And to do His will. And it's not maybe. It's yes, you do. So I think that has to be incorporated somehow in fiction. Now, you don't come out and wag your finger. And a lot of the books that I've read that are Christian fiction are, you would not want to read them. I mean, they're more like a catechism or something or less. But it can be done, and we've shown authors who can do it. I mean, nobody is more quoted and revered than Flannery O'Connor as far as Catholicism. The funny thing is people didn't even know she was doing that when she first started. I'll hush.
No,
That's why
but I think you're right, Phil. I think that we do, we had a period of time when the church was the patron of the arts, and we're not in that time any longer.
You think there's, I talked to Michael Driscoll up at Notre Dame. I think has he spoken here now? He's got a music, master of music, liturgical music, and his thesis, his philosophy is that, the church needs to get, just go to Mass and listen to music at Mass and ask how much does the church put into it, the music, just something as simple as the music at Mass, and is the church really putting its treasure where its heart is. And I think you've seen that, in artwork all around, because the church doesn't put the emphasis on it. I don't know if we can ever get back to it, but I think it would be a nice place for us to start. Do you see it ever coming back? The church being a patron of the arts?
Well, we can find that beauty in, we don't have to really go back, we can go forward with that beauty. For instance, the music, the liturgical music. And we have to have an artist with free expression to be able, this is free will too. To be able to use the gift God has given in maybe a new way. So we can't look back and say, well, that's the only right way. No. As we go forward, but we do have to keep remembering the tenets of our faith. And we do have to believe that we're made in the image and likeness of God. And we do have to believe that He's going to help us. And we put all this into the artwork, into the painting, into the music, into the novels, or whatever. That's the way I feel about
Could you talk about the craft of your creative process? Do your characters come to you full blown, or do you find yourself, taken over by a character and surprised by what happens? Do you have an outline, or is there something just kind of free flowing that you feel kind of coming up unconsciously?
I think for myself that my characters have largely been based on people, kind of a synthesis of 2 or 3 people with certain characteristics that I wanted to bring to the novel. And then from there, the novel somewhat kind of it's the what if scenario. What if this happened? How would these people respond?
I don't give any outline. I don't ever write from an outline. I write from a character. And similar to Ron, it won't be someone I know. Mostly they come from a situation I feel strongly about. It can be a bad situation where I feel sorry for someone who's been hurt or something, and look at all the things that happen to them, and the characters just pop into your head. Or it can be a happy thing. But I usually start with the character, and then I just think this is the kind of person this character is. What would he do in this situation? And I don't know how it comes, but it's just all of a sudden, sometimes it's just there. This is what comes next and next and next. But you always ask yourself, what comes next? You don't want to get waddle down on one page, the same thing for 50 pages or whatever.
So you spoke to that, one of the authors spoke of that experience of almost being like God, watching the characters and still knowing that they're bad or they're flawed, but yet you still love them.
Right.
So is that, do you share that feeling?
I do, absolutely. That's one reason why we picked that quote from Elizabeth Strout.
And I think that's what's
She's not a Catholic about it.
I think that's what's inherent in our perspective about a novel with a Catholic worldview. Again, unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately. There's a lot of literature that carries the title Christian with it, and there's Christian mystery, Christian romance, Christian historical fiction.